Have you ever wondered if a journey into the deep forest could completely change your destiny? Two friends, with the simple desire to take a peaceful walk in nature, never expected to encounter a wild horse, with a dark secret hidden, a story unknown to the world. But what makes everything even stranger is that this horse seems to have been waiting for them for a long time. What is it waiting for? A mysterious encounter, where every step on this foggy path reveals unimaginable truths. Are you ready to embrace the unexpected? The feeling of not being able to turn back overwhelmed Daniel and Leo as they ventured deeper into the forest. It felt as if something invisible was surrounding them, making every step heavier. The dry leaves beneath their feet crunched, serving as quiet reminders of the presence of the world around them. This was not an ordinary forest, it was a different space, where the past and present merged together, where every branch, every patch of land might be hiding unexplored secrets. With each step, they entered a completely different realm from the world they knew. Towering ancient trees reached toward the sky, their dense canopy blocking nearly all sunlight. Each gentle breeze carried strange sounds, as if there was some secret conversation happening in this space that they couldn't understand. The walls of trees seemed to be holding a story yet to be told, a story that this forest had carried for a long time. For Leo, who loved tranquility and immersing himself in nature, this was supposed to be a relaxing trip. However, for Daniel, things didn't seem to stop there. He could sense something unusual in the air, a mystery that made him feel uncomfortable, despite his initial expectations. His mind was filled with questions he couldn't answer. Why did it feel like something was watching them? Why was the silence in this forest so profound, as if everything were trapped in a painting they couldn't understand? This feeling was unlike their previous forest adventures, where they simply walked in and enjoyed the fresh air. This presence, this sensation, was something they couldn't explain. It was as if the forest itself held a secret that only those brave enough could understand. On a foggy morning, as they continued their journey, the soft light of dawn began to filter through the thick mist, illuminating the gently swaying branches. In that hazy scenery, suddenly, a large silhouette appeared before them. A wild Mustang stood silently in a clearing in the forest, surrounded by towering ancient trees, as though it had been there for a long time. The horse stood still, motionless. Its gaze was one of unwavering determination, not the least bit frightened by the presence of the two men. This was strange, because wild horses typically run away in fear when encountering humans. But this horse wasn't like that. It stood there, with deep eyes, staring directly at them, as though it was trying to convey a message. The horse's body was covered in scars, and its coat no longer had the glossy sheen of a healthy wild horse. The old scars on its body seemed to bear witness to a painful past, as if it had endured fierce battles. Yet, strangely, instead of running away, this horse looked at them with a steady gaze, as if it knew that this encounter was not a coincidence. It had a story to tell, and perhaps Daniel and Leo were the only ones who could understand. Leo stood silently, unsure of what to do. He felt something odd in the atmosphere, an energy that made him feel uneasy. Both of them knew this was no ordinary encounter. This horse carried a mystery, and it seemed to be searching for someone who could understand it, someone who could decipher the wounds it bore. Daniel, who always had a strong intuition for nature, felt that this horse was not an ordinary creature. It seemed to have endured much pain, but its gaze wasn't that of a wild animal. It was the gaze of a creature that had suffered life's brutality but remained standing strong. And that made Daniel wonder, Was it waiting for them? As the fog thickened around them, and they moved closer to the horse, a stillness enveloped the space. The air seemed to thicken, and all surrounding sounds became distant. Daniel and Leo stood there, without speaking, but both felt that something deeper was unfolding. This strange feeling kept them from moving forward. They could only stand still, observing the horse and its gaze. The horse showed no signs of fear. It didn't rush to run away, nor did it panic like most wild horses they had encountered. Instead, it stood still, its eyes fixed on them as if it was recognizing something they couldn't understand. That gaze wasn't like any they had seen from a wild animal before. It was the gaze of deep understanding, of a creature that had endured suffering, but still stood firm. Daniel and Leo couldn't explain this strange feeling. They stood there, feeling as though they had been drawn into a story yet to be told, a secret the forest had been keeping. And this horse, it wasn't just a part of the forest, it was the key to unlocking the secret this forest had been holding. This strange feeling wasn't just simple curiosity about a wild horse. It was a powerful sensation, an irresistible pull, making them unable to turn back. It made them wonder, could this horse be a sign of something larger, a secret yet to be revealed that they would uncover throughout their journey? The feeling of suspense still haunted Daniel and Leo as they continued walking behind the Mustang. The ancient trees towered over the sky like invisible guardians of the forest, making the atmosphere around them feel heavier. The horse wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't running away nor stopping. It simply walked with determination, leading them deeper into the forest, where light rarely pierced through the thick canopy and no human footprints could be clearly seen. It seemed unafraid. There was no sign of anxiety or panic in the horse's movements. Every step it took seemed like a sign, a silent message it wanted to convey to Daniel and Leo, two strangers in its world. But with each step they took, Daniel's heart raced, and the strange feeling in his chest grew stronger. This horse was not a normal wild creature. Its eyes held an intelligence and determination that was almost unbelievable, as if it understood more than the two men about the path they were walking. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, his voice full of worry. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He could sense something was off, but deep down, he understood that this was a horse leading them to something important. Something they couldn't resist. He took a deep breath and decided to keep going. "It definitely knows this path," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving the horse. "And I think we need to follow it. It has something it wants us to understand." They continued walking, with the horse leading them ahead without turning back, yet it seemed to know they were still behind, following each step. The strange feeling now made it seem like they were no longer in control of this journey. The entire forest seemed to be involved in their quest, as if the forest itself was watching over them, quietly protecting them, silently guiding them. With each step, the horse's movements grew more powerful and resolute. It wasn't rushing, it wasn't running away. It was a creature that had overcome fear and accepted the truth that its life only had one path left: move forward, keep going, regardless of what lay ahead. And it wasn't just guiding them, but they, the strangers, also felt strengthened by it. After walking behind the horse for a long time, the surrounding landscape slowly began to change. The sky grew darker, the air heavier, and the trees seemed to become even more mysterious. The path they were on seemed to have been untouched for a long time. The ancient trees stood strong, but now they seemed to have witnessed so many untold stories that they could no longer recount them. Suddenly, the horse stopped in a wide clearing. Leo and Daniel approached cautiously, and their eyes began to notice something strange. An open area they never expected to find deep in the forest. It was an old, decaying horse corral, abandoned long ago. The wood was rotting, the ropes frayed and broken, and a chilling atmosphere filled the area, making both of them feel an eerie silence. As they got closer, Daniel noticed dry blood stains on the ground. These marks weren't from a random battle, they were clearly the remnants of a struggle. Not just a horse's fight, but a life that had been imprisoned, abused to the point of being unimaginable. "Leo, we need to be careful," Daniel said, his eyes lighting up as he realized the gravity of the situation. "This is more than just an abandoned corral. This is where we're finding traces of a crime." Leo looked around, and after a few seconds, a sense of horror gradually filled his gaze. "No way. This is a corral where someone kept it." Daniel knelt down and touched the ground. He could feel the coldness and darkness that lingered there. It wasn't just the suffering of the horse, but the signs of some unseen hands that had acted cruelly, trading wild horses as mere goods. "We can't stop here," Daniel said, his eyes focused on the horse. "We need to uncover the truth. This is a crime, and we need to help it escape from what happened." They ventured deeper into the corral area, and the more they searched, the more they discovered, and each revelation left them stunned. A rusty chain lay sprawled near a broken post, still showing signs of violent tugs. Then, they saw something even more terrifying, a red-hot branding iron with the letter H burned into it, possibly marking the horse when it was imprisoned. "This isn't a normal wild horse," Daniel said, his heart filled with anger. "It's been abused. Used as a commodity." As they got closer, a heavy feeling overwhelmed both of them. It felt as though an invisible hand was pressing down on them, making each step harder. Then, they heard a sound from behind, faint but distinct. It wasn't the horse's sound, it was something else. A particular noise, as though something was watching them. The horse stiffened, its ears raised and its body tense. It turned around and stared intently at something behind them. Daniel and Leo followed its gaze, but all they could see was darkness. Cold sweat broke out on Daniel's forehead. "We're not alone." Another sound came, this time louder and clearer. A steady breath, followed by a low growl, carrying an unmistakable sense of threat. Daniel and Leo immediately realized that they weren't the only ones in the forest anymore. "Leo, we have to get out of here," Daniel said, his voice trembling with fear. "This is not just a wild horse. We're facing something much worse." The horse turned again, looking at them as if it was protecting them. Suddenly, a loud growl echoed throughout the forest, shaking the trees around them. The sounds weren't coming from a wild animal, but something far more terrifying. The forest no longer felt like a safe place, it had become a trap. The air was thick with tension as Daniel and Leo continued their investigation into the dark secrets of the forest. The discoveries they had made, the branding iron, the chains, the dried blood on the ground, had led them to the undeniable truth. The Mustang was not just a wild animal, it had been imprisoned, abused, and exploited by someone. But who could be so cruel as to treat such a majestic creature this way? As they ventured deeper into the forest, following the trail that the horse had unknowingly guided them toward, a feeling of impending doom weighed heavily on them. They were nearing the heart of the mystery, but what awaited them was a confrontation unlike any they had ever imagined. They heard footsteps crunching through the underbrush, and before they could react, a man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, rugged, and his expression was one of cold menace. His eyes locked onto Daniel and Leo with an unsettling intensity, but what caught their attention even more was the rifle slung over his shoulder. "That's my horse," the man said gruffly, his voice low and filled with venom. "You've been trespassing on my land. I suggest you leave." Daniel and Leo froze, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The man's demeanor made it clear that he saw the Mustang not as a living creature, but as a possession, an item to be owned and controlled. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, and his heart pounded. This man was the one who had inflicted so much suffering on the Mustang, and now he was standing in front of them, arrogantly claiming ownership of something that should never have been his. "Your horse?" Daniel repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. "That horse has been abused, tortured, and locked up. It's not yours. And we won't let you take it back." Leo's gaze flickered nervously to the rifle. The threat of violence was palpable, but they couldn't back down. They had come this far, uncovered so much, and now they were standing in front of the monster who had caused all this pain. It was no longer about just protecting the horse. It was about standing up for what was right, about challenging the power this man had over the Mustang's life. The man took a step forward, a smirk curling on his lips as he tightened his grip on the rifle. "You really think you can stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. This horse belongs to me. You'd better step aside before things get ugly." Daniel felt a surge of anger rise in him, but he stood firm. "We're not leaving without the horse. If you want to fight, then you'll get one. But you'll never own this Mustang again." There was no fear in Daniel's voice. He knew the danger they were in, but this was the moment that everything had been building toward. A fight for justice. A fight for freedom. And, most importantly, a fight for the Mustang's life. Just as the man raised the rifle, ready to make his move, something unexpected happened. The Mustang, which had been standing silently nearby, seemed to sense the imminent danger. With a sudden snort, it charged forward, its hoofs pounding against the ground with terrifying force. Daniel and Leo barely had time to react. The horse, with all the fury and pain it had endured over the years, leaped into action, its powerful legs propelling it forward with unmatched speed. It was no longer a victim, it had become the protector, the one who had been waiting for this moment. The man's eyes widened in shock as the Mustang rushed toward him, its body low, its nostrils flaring. For a brief second, it seemed like time slowed. The man tried to raise the rifle, but before he could aim it, the Mustang collided with him, knocking him to the ground with an earth-shaking thud. Daniel and Leo stood in stunned silence as the horse pinned the man to the ground, its teeth bared, its powerful body a symbol of defiance. This wasn't just a horse protecting itself, it was fighting for its freedom, its life, and those it had come to trust. The man struggled beneath the Mustang's weight, his hands trembling as he tried to push the horse off, but the Mustang stood firm. It was a battle between the embodiment of cruelty and the embodiment of courage. The Mustang wasn't just defending its own freedom, it was fighting for justice, for everything that had been stolen from it. "Get off me," the man snarled, but the horse didn't flinch. Its eyes glowed with an intense fury that reflected every scar, every wound, every moment of suffering it had endured. Leo and Daniel rushed forward, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. "It's over," Daniel said, his voice fierce. "This horse is free now. You'll never hurt it again." As the Mustang stood victorious, the man, still on the ground, cursed and shouted, "You think you've won? You're nothing but fools. I'll make sure you regret this." But before the man could do anything else, the Mustang, still protecting its newfound allies, turned and trotted back toward Daniel and Leo, its eyes calm but alert. It wasn't running away, it was leading them away from danger. "Go!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Leo's arm and pulling him in the direction the Mustang was heading. "We need to get out of here before he comes after us again." The sound of the man's voice shouting after them was quickly drowned out by the pounding of hoofs. The forest seemed to close in around them as they ran, the path ahead growing darker and more treacherous. Their breath came in ragged gasps, and their hearts raced, not knowing if they would make it out alive. The fear of being caught, of being hunted, surged through their veins. The sound of the man's footsteps grew fainter, but the tension didn't ease. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig beneath their feet felt like an echo of danger. Behind them, the Mustang continued to guide them, its strength and courage pushing them forward. With each step, Daniel and Leo could feel the intensity of the chase, the pulse of survival growing stronger. As they broke through the thick brush and reached the clearing, Daniel glanced over his shoulder to see the man, rifle raised, but he was too far behind. They were getting away, but for how long? "We're almost there," Leo shouted, his voice strained. The sound of gunshots suddenly rang out, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He looked back to see the man had fired, but the Mustang, ever the protector, reared up, its powerful hoofs striking the ground with such force that the man staggered back, unable to shoot. "Go! Go! Go!" Daniel yelled, pushing Leo forward. The Mustang had given them the chance they needed to escape, and they weren't going to waste it. The final stretch was a blur, every muscle in their bodies screamed with exhaustion, but they pushed through. The trees thinned, and they emerged onto a dirt road. The Mustang, still by their side, slowed its pace and let them catch up. They had made it. Daniel collapsed against a tree, his chest heaving. Leo sat beside him, his eyes wide with disbelief. They had survived. They had escaped. And the Mustang, their steadfast protector, was finally free. The sound of sirens approached in the distance, the arrival of the authorities signaling the end of their escape. But for Daniel, Leo, and the Mustang, the journey wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where they could finally live without fear. After escaping the immediate danger and finding temporary safety, Daniel and Leo stood in the clearing, their hearts still racing, their minds reeling from the intensity of the confrontation. The Mustang, its body worn but its spirit unbroken, stood quietly by their side. It had fought fiercely for its freedom, for its life, and now, it was up to Daniel and Leo to make sure that fight hadn't been in vain. They could see in the Mustang's eyes a quiet plea, a call for them to finish what had begun. "We can't just leave it here," Daniel said, his voice full of resolve, though his body still bore the marks of exhaustion. "We have the proof, but it's not enough. We need to make sure these people never hurt another animal again. We have to finish this." Leo, his face pale but determined, nodded firmly. "We've come too far to turn back now. We're not just talking about one horse anymore. This is about putting an end to all of this, about protecting every animal out there that's suffering the way this Mustang has." With a newfound determination, they made their way back into the forest, retracing their steps to the site where they had found the Mustang's prison. The forest, which had felt like a sanctuary in moments past, now loomed like a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded. The weight of what they had uncovered hung heavily between them, but they knew they could not walk away. Daniel carefully began taking photographs, each click of the camera capturing another piece of evidence: a rusty chain, the scorched earth, the branding iron that had been used to mark the Mustang as a possession. These images, they knew, were their weapon. They were the evidence that would expose the dark truth hidden deep within the forest. "This has to be enough," Daniel said, reviewing the photos as Leo collected more evidence nearby. The dried blood stains on the ground, the remnants of torn ropes, the broken fence, each clue painted a grim picture, but it was one that needed to be shared with the world. But Daniel's thoughts were not solely focused on the photos. He was thinking about the Mustang's future. They could not let this animal's suffering be forgotten. It was up to them to ensure that the people responsible for this would face justice. The pictures were only the beginning. Now they had to see this through to the end. After gathering all the evidence, Daniel and Leo contacted the authorities. They knew that the fight wasn't over, that this was just the beginning. But getting the law involved was a crucial next step. They weren't just fighting for the Mustang anymore. They were fighting to stop a whole network of animal abuse that spanned far beyond this one case. With the photos and evidence they had collected, they worked tirelessly with local officials, urging them to act. Days passed, but Daniel and Leo didn't rest. They followed up with the authorities, pushing for action, making sure their plea wasn't ignored. The Mustang, after all, was only one of many. And it wasn't just the abuse, it was the trafficking, the exploitation of wildlife, that had to be stopped. The breakthrough came in the form of a phone call. The authorities were moving. A full investigation had been launched, and a team was being sent out to raid the property. Daniel and Leo could hardly contain their relief, but they knew this wasn't the end of the fight. They had to remain vigilant, to ensure the criminals would be held accountable. When the day of the raid arrived, Daniel and Leo stood in the distance, watching as officers swarmed the property. The man who had abused the Mustang, along with several accomplices, was taken into custody. The authorities uncovered a shocking operation, one that had been trafficking wild horses and other animals for years. The people who had caused so much pain were now facing justice. As the criminals were taken away, Daniel and Leo exchanged a look of quiet satisfaction. It was a victory. The Mustang's freedom had been secured, and the criminals who had tried to exploit it would be held responsible for their actions. But even in the moment of triumph, there was something Daniel and Leo hadn't expected, something that would change everything. As the Mustang was being led away from the clearing, the horse stopped, turning back to look at them. It wasn't running toward the wild, as they had assumed it would. Instead, it stood still, watching them with those deep, intelligent eyes, as if it was waiting for something. "It's not going anywhere," Leo said, his voice filled with surprise. Daniel watched the Mustang closely. It was a moment of profound connection, one that neither of them could have anticipated. The Mustang had been through so much, and yet, despite everything, it had chosen to stay with them, the two humans who had fought to protect it. In the past, this horse had been abused, treated as nothing more than a possession, but now, it had found something it had never known: trust. And it had chosen them. Without a word, Daniel stepped forward, his hand outstretched. The Mustang took a cautious step toward him, allowing him to stroke its mane gently. Leo followed suit, his hand resting on the horse's side. It was a moment of peace, a moment that said everything they had fought for had been worth it. The Mustang wasn't just freed physically, it was freed emotionally, too. For the first time in its life, it had found safety, love, and loyalty. And it wasn't going to run back into the wild. Instead, it had found its home, right here, with the two men who had saved it. As they walked together out of the forest, the Mustang beside them, it became clear that this wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning. The Mustang would never again be a prisoner, but it also wouldn't be alone. It had found a family in Daniel and Leo, and they had found a companion in the Mustang. The sun began to set as they made their way across the open fields, the Mustang walking freely by their side, its powerful hooves striking the earth in a rhythmic beat of freedom. The once tormented horse was now free, not just from captivity, but from the scars of its past. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. And as the evening light bathed the fields in golden warmth, Daniel, Leo, and the Mustang walked into the future together, a future where freedom, love, and loyalty would always guide them forward. As the Mustang galloped across the field, Daniel and Leo stood together, watching it disappear into the horizon. The Mustang had fought for its freedom, and they had fought for it as well. But even in this victory, something still lingered. The journey was not over, it was just the beginning of a larger battle. The Mustang's journey is just a part of a much bigger story, Daniel said, his eyes still following the horse as it moved freely. It's about loyalty and courage, those values are what brought us here. But the fight for freedom isn't finished. Leo nodded. This isn't just about one horse. It's about making sure this never happens again. The Mustang had shown them the true meaning of courage, not just in the face of danger, but in trusting those who stand by you. It had been a victim, but now it had become a symbol of protecting and fighting for what's right. Standing in the field, Daniel and Leo realized that although the Mustang had found its freedom, many other creatures were still suffering. The Mustang's story wasn't an isolated case, it reflected the struggles faced by countless other animals. This isn't over, Daniel said quietly, his gaze still on the horizon. There are many animals that still need help. We can't walk away from this. The Mustang's freedom symbolized something much larger, the need to protect wildlife, to ensure that no creature has to live in fear or captivity. Every being deserves the chance to live freely, and it's the responsibility of people like Daniel and Leo to continue fighting for that freedom. The journey had been long and filled with danger, but Daniel and Leo never gave up. They faced overwhelming challenges, but their determination kept them moving forward. The Mustang's resilience in the face of suffering had inspired them, and now they understood that true strength lies in never giving up, even when the road is hard. This is what resilience means, Leo said. No matter what, we kept going. And we succeeded. Daniel smiled. The Mustang didn't give up, and neither did we. That's the lesson, it's about staying strong, no matter the challenges. The connection between humans and animals. As the sun set, Daniel, Leo, and the Mustang stood together, the bond between them clear. The Mustang, once a symbol of captivity, had become a symbol of freedom, trust, and loyalty. The relationship between humans and animals isn't just about saving them, it's about understanding and respecting them. This horse isn't just an animal, Daniel said softly. It's a friend. It's shown us the power of trust. Leo nodded, his gaze fixed on the Mustang. We're not saving them for us. We're saving them because they deserve it, because they trust us." As they continued walking, the Mustang by their side, Daniel and Leo knew that this fight was far from over. The Mustang had found its freedom, but many other creatures still remained trapped in darkness, their cries unheard. "What's next?" Leo asked, his voice full of determination. Daniel looked at the Mustang, then out toward the open fields. "The fight isn't over. This is just the beginning. We've freed one, but there are many more who need help." The Mustang had found freedom, but the true journey was to ensure that freedom could be experienced by every creature. The world is still filled with animals that need help, and now it's up to them, and all of us, to ensure the Mustang's story doesn't end here. The journey continues, not just for the Mustang, but for every creature who deserves to live freely.